Alright, so when you think of Disney princess films such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, Mulan,
and so on and so forth,
you would typically think of the princess whose name is in the title. This is because for the most part, these princesses are the main protagonists of their respected films. There is one film, however, that took a lot of new directions, which nearly bankrupted Disney in the process, but made the title princess more of a side character: Sleeping Beauty. Many viewers dislike this movie because of the lack of screen time for Princess Aurora. You'll often hear concerns that Sleeping Beauty is problematic and lacks strong female representation. Today, however, I'd like to argue that the film is actually not lacking at all in strong female representation. Although it is true the Princess Aurora herself is very minute in both appearance and characterization, I would like to make a case for the following characters whom I consider to be not only a great representation of strong female characters, but the actual protagonists of Sleeping Beauty: Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. Often mistaken for side characters themselves, these three fairies are the driving force of the film. We spend the most time with them, we watch them develop over the story, and ultimately, it is the fairies who end up rescuing not only a princess, but a prince as well. So before I dive into this case, let's just quickly go over what makes a protagonist. A protagonist is the leading character or one of the major characters in a drama, movie, novel, or other fictional text, an advocate or champion of a particular cause or idea. Aurora doesn't act, she is acted upon. She is definitely not the hero of the story. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather are the ones who make all the critical decisions in the film, the ones which drive the action. They are the ones who act with agency to counteract Maleficent. On top of that, they are the only other characters in the film whose decisions and actions drive the plot. The central conflict in Sleeping Beauty is not the romance between Aurora and Philip, or even the conflict between Maleficent and Aurora's parents. Instead, the conflict is the Good Fairies' battle with Maleficent, in which Aurora, Philip, and all the other characters are merely chess pieces. You've heard the joke before. Maleficent crashes Aurora's christening because she wasn't invited. What a petty and spiteful witch. However, Maleficent doesn't just crash the party because she wasn't invited, but also because she was well aware who was. To Maleficent, King Stefan clearly picked a side in their conflict, and because of this, Maleficent includes the king in her conflict with Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. The first thing Maleficent does when she storms the castle is she points out all the other attendees and sneers at the inclusion of the Good Fairies.
How quaint, even the rabble.
The Good Fairies are just about the only characters in the film who grow as people over the course of the movie, who are different at the end of the story than they are at the beginning, and who the audience identifies with and roots for as people, rather than the stereotypical idealized non-entities Aurora and Philip are, who we are trained to root for by default. First, we have Flora, the self-appointed leader of the trio. She is an idealist, stern and authoritative, but kind and understanding as a maternal figure. She takes charge when she needs to, which certainly gets under Merryweather's skin. Then there is Fauna, who is rather passive. She is optimistic, loving, and a bit of an airhead. She serves as the buffer between Flora and Merryweather. Finally, we have Merryweather. She is stubborn, rebellious, feisty, and confident. She's the only fairy to quip at Maleficent.
You weren't wanted.
Neither of the other two so much as utter a word to the mistress of all evil. Originally, these three fairies were meant to be indistinguishable, like Huey, Dewey, and Louie, but the team eventually decided against it and gave them three distinct personalities. So now let's ask this question: why not Aurora? Well, Aurora first appears 18 minutes into the motion picture and pricks her finger 50 minutes into a 75-minute movie. Aurora has a total of 18 minutes of screen time. She's a baby for the majority of the beginning and asleep for a majority of the climax. Now let's look at some other Disney princess movies. Both Snow White and Cinderella appear within 10 minutes of their respective films. Their side characters, like the fairy godmother, have roughly 5 minutes of screen time. Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather appear less than 5 minutes into Sleeping Beauty. They have roughly 50 minutes of screen time. It's hard to call them side characters when they make up the majority of the movie. Jeffrey Katzenberg once said during the making of The Road to El Dorado that he wanted to make a movie where the side characters were the main characters, since he believed every character had a story to tell. I think this is true when it comes to Sleeping Beauty. Speaking of which, what is Sleeping Beauty? Where'd the title come from? Is it the name given to Aurora? Or is it perchance Merryweather's spell? We're never clear on what Merryweather's gift to young Aurora would have been, but we do know her current gift is what changed Aurora's condition. Much like how Flora gave Aurora the gift of beauty, Merryweather gave her the gift of sleep as opposed to death. Sleeping Beauty might just be the name of Merryweather's gift instead of a nickname for Aurora. It could also serve as the involvement of Flora and Merryweather as the two main fairies. Utilizing their relationship throughout the film, they are constantly squabbling, but share one thing in common: their love for Aurora. With so many strong female characters, it's easy to overlook this when you can sum up the movie as the prince rescues the princess. But who rescues the prince? Later in the movie, Maleficent kidnaps Prince Philip and has him chained up in her dungeon. I know modern audiences look for princesses who can stand up for themselves and princesses who are capable of saving the day, but how many other stories do you know of 3 middle-aged ladies rescuing a prince from the dungeon? On top of this, Prince Philip does not defeat Maleficent. The fairies do. They also do the majority of the work in the finale. Philip holds his own, sure, but when it comes to falling boulders, boiling water, and a flurry of arrows, it takes the addition of magic to hold the dark forces at bay. Also an enchanted sword, which ultimately slays the dragon. Although, points for the good throw. So now for my final point, why Sleeping Beauty is quite progressive for 1959.
Now, Father, you're living in the past. This is the 14th century.
It takes 9 minutes into the movie for a male character to speak, with the exception of the narrator. The kings are less concerned with having heirs to their thrones, and more concerned with being grandparents. Let's count the main characters that are male. The 2 kings, Stefan and Hubert, and Prince Philip. Now let's count the females: Flora, Fauna, Merryweather, Aurora, and Maleficent. So it's already a female-heavy cast, and it's showing these women in a position of power.
Progressive for the Middle Ages. Yeah.
We have a leader, a buffer, a rebel, a princess, and a mistress of all evil, who abuses her staff. The kingdom relies on the wisdom of these fairies, and it is their wisdom that ultimately saves the day, not the prince. So now that we've learned the importance of these 3 fairies, let's dive into my general issue. Modern media doesn't understand Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. From a lack of merchandise to inaccurate and insulting portrayals, these fairies really get the short end of the stick.
But don't blame me.
I blame you.
Of the slew of Disney characters that are remembered and beloved, why do these 3 get the shaft? Seriously, how the hell did Merryweather get snubbed from the meme culture? To build off this point, Aurora and Maleficent are usually the only characters that are talked about nowadays when it comes to discussion surrounding this film. This leads me to question, why do strong female characters have to be young and beautiful to be remembered? I don't see anything wrong with the characters of Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, and I hope that one day they get the respect they deserve.
Make it pink. Now hide, quick.